A mother went shopping but never returned. 14 years later, her family discovers the shocking reason. The evening sunlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains of the Dawson family living room, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Dan Dawson, now 50 years old, adjusted his position in his wheelchair, wincing slightly as he shifted his weight. It had been 14 years since the accident, a sudden stroke that sent him tumbling down the stairs, leaving him with a broken hip and confined to a wheelchair. Though time had passed, the physical limitations remained a constant reminder of how dramatically his life had changed. "Dad, do you want a blanket?" Ellie called from the kitchen, already pulling one from the hall closet before he could answer. At 19, she was the only one of his children who still lived at home, shouldering the responsibility of his daily care with a maturity beyond her years. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Dan replied, his voice carrying a perpetual weariness that had become part of his personality. "What time did Ethan say he'd be here?" Mark, Dan's second oldest son at 25, checked his phone. "He said around 6, should be here any minute." Mark had his father's build, broad shoulders and the same cleft in his chin, but his temperament was more measured, practical. He worked as an accountant at a firm downtown, having put himself through college with scholarships and part-time jobs after their mother disappeared. "Aldi, could you please lower the volume?" Leah called from the dining room where she was setting the table. At 23, she had grown into a responsible young woman who managed a local bookstore. Her shoulder-length dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail as she moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining room. 15-year-old Aldi, sprawled on the couch with the remote in hand, reluctantly turned down the sports highlights he'd been watching. "I'm just looking for a good movie for tonight," he defended himself, scrolling through streaming options. "What about that new science fiction one? The one with the aliens that look like humans?" "No aliens," Dan said with a small smile. "You know Ellie doesn't like them." Ellie appeared from the kitchen carrying a stack of plates. "I don't mind aliens. I just don't like when they explode out of people's chests while we're eating dessert." The familiar banter filled the house with warmth, a testament to how they'd managed to forge ahead as a family despite everything. Every weekend they gathered like this, all 5 children coming together for dinner, conversation, and a movie. It was their ritual, their way of maintaining the connections that had kept them strong through the years of absence. "The table's ready," Leah announced, stepping back to admire her handiwork. 5 place settings with a 6th at the head of the table for Ethan, each plate perfectly aligned, glasses filled with ice water, napkins folded neatly beside forks and knives, everything in its proper place, just as their mother had taught her. "Something smells amazing," Mark said, making his way to the dining room. "Lasagna," Ellie replied proudly, "and I made garlic bread too." Aldi abandoned his movie search and joined them at the table, his gangly teenage frame folding into his usual chair. "Can we start?" "I'm starving." Dan wheeled himself to his spot at the table, shaking his head. "We wait for Ethan. We always wait until everyone's here." "But the food's getting cold," Aldi complained, eyeing the steaming dish at the center of the table. "I'll call him," Mark offered, already dialing his brother's number. After a moment, he frowned. No answer. Voicemail. They sat in silence, the minutes ticking by. The lasagna ceased steaming. The ice in their water glasses began to melt. Dan checked his watch repeatedly, worry lines deepening across his forehead. Just as Leah was about to suggest they start without Ethan, they heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, followed by the slamming of a car door. The front door burst open and Ethan rushed in, his 30-year-old face flushed with excitement and concern. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, tie loosened, top button undone, dark hair falling across his forehead. He glanced around the dining room, taking in the scene of his family seated around the table waiting for him. "Sorry I'm late," he said breathlessly, but there was something in his voice, an urgency, a tension that immediately put everyone on alert. "It's fine, we were just about to—" Dan began, but Ethan cut him off. "I found something," he blurted out, pulling out his chair but remaining standing. "About Mom." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Shoulders tensed, Faces hardened. "I got a call from Detective Vans today," Ethan continued, fumbling with his phone. "They found something. I need to show you." "Sit down, Ethan," Dan said firmly. "We've been waiting for you. The food's getting cold." "Dad, you don't understand. This is important." Ethan remained standing, clutching his phone like a lifeline. "Just give me 1 minute." "Your father's right," Mark interjected, his voice calm but authoritative. "Let's eat first. Whatever it is can wait until after dinner." Ethan looked around the table, desperate for an ally, but found none. Leah was studying her plate. Ellie was biting her lip nervously. Aldi was staring at him with a mixture of annoyance and discomfort. "We talked about this," Leah said quietly. "We agreed not to bring up Mom anymore, not during family time." "But this is different," Ethan insisted. "The police found—" "Enough!" Mark's voice rose sharply. "We know what happened. She left us. She couldn't handle it anymore. Dad's accident, the medical bills, 5 kids to raise on her own. She met someone else and took off." "That's not true," Ethan shot back. "Mom would never—" "She did, though, didn't she?" Leah joined in, her calm facade cracking. "Dad's in a wheelchair. We're drowning in debt from his medical bills, and suddenly she's gone without a trace. What would you call that?" 14 years, Ethan," Mark added, his voice softening slightly. 14 years without a word. No calls, no letters, nothing. What more proof do you need?" The heated exchange escalated, voices overlapping as years of pain and resentment bubbled to the surface. Aldi shrunk in his seat, while Ellie looked helplessly between her arguing siblings. "Enough!" Dan's voice thundered through the room, followed immediately by a wheezing cough that bent him double in his wheelchair. The fighting stopped instantly. Ellie jumped up to pat her father's back, offering him water as the coughing subsided. "I'm sorry, Dad," she murmured, then addressed her siblings. "Please, let's not do this. Dad's been looking forward to tonight all week. He misses us. Can't we just have one peaceful dinner?" A heavy silence settled over the table, broken only by Dan's ragged breathing as he recovered from his coughing fit. "Fine," Ethan finally said, sliding into his chair. His jaw was tight with frustration. "But I need you all to know that this isn't just another dead-end lead. The police found Mom's car. It was submerged in a river." Despite their determination to dismiss him, this revelation caused all heads to snap up in attention. "What?" Dan's voice was barely audible. "Detective Vans called me this afternoon," Ethan continued, sensing his opening. "They found her car in a river. That's why I was late. I was on the phone with him getting details." Dan turned to Ellie. "Get my phone from the side table, please." She quickly retrieved it, watching as her father scrolled through his notifications with trembling fingers. His face paled. 4 missed calls from Detective Vans, he confirmed, looking up at Ethan. Did they find her body?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. The detective said they're still processing the scene. He said it would help if we could come down there." The family exchanged glances, the dinner forgotten as the reality of this new development sank in. "We should eat something first," Ellie suggested, breaking the stunned silence. Her practical nature took over as she looked at her father with concern. "Dad needs to take his medication with food, and it'll just take a few minutes." Mark nodded in agreement. "She's right. Let's eat quickly, then we can go." They ate in tense silence, the once appetizing lasagna now tasteless in their mouths. Forks scraped against plates as they hurried through the meal, minds racing with questions none of them dared to voice aloud. When they'd eaten enough to justify leaving, Mark and Aldi began clearing the table while Leah and Ellie helped Dan prepare for the unexpected outing. Ellie gathered his medication and a blanket, while Leah collected his wallet and phone. "Are you sure you want to go, Dad?" Ellie asked softly as she helped him adjust his sweater. "We could stay here while the others check it out." Dan shook his head firmly. "I need to be there." Outside, the evening had grown darker, a chill settling in the air that hadn't been there when they'd gathered for dinner. The old family SUV, modified to accommodate Dan's wheelchair, stood waiting in the driveway of their modest home. A single-story ranch-style house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by mature oak trees that had witnessed the family's joys and sorrows for decades. Ethan and Mark carefully helped their father from his wheelchair and into the passenger seat, folding the wheelchair and storing it in the back. Leah, Ellie, and Aldi climbed into the middle row while Ethan took the driver's seat. "I'll drive," he said, adjusting the mirrors. "I know exactly where we're going." As he backed out of the driveway, Ethan couldn't help but notice how the house looked from the outside. Porch light on, warm glow from the windows spilling onto the lawn. It looked like any other family home on a quiet evening. No one passing by would guess the turmoil that churned within its walls, or the gaping absence that had shaped their lives for 14 years. The car rolled down the familiar streets of their small town, past the high school where all 5 children had attended, past the grocery store where their mother had supposedly gone the day she disappeared. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to maintain the speed limit despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "What exactly did Detective Vans tell you?" Dan asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the car. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Not much, just that they found Mum's car in a river while investigating something else. He didn't give details over the phone." "After all this time," Leah murmured from the back seat. "Why now?" No one had an answer for her. Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming message. "That's the detective," he said, glancing at it briefly. "He's sending the exact location. It's at Miller's Lake." "That's nearly 30 minutes from here," Mark noted. "What would Mum's car be doing all the way out there?" The unspoken implication hung in the air. Miller's Lake was remote, secluded, the kind of place someone might go if they didn't want to be found. The remainder of the drive passed in uneasy silence, each family member lost in their own thoughts. As they left the town behind, the streetlights became scarcer, and the road narrowed. Ethan flipped on the high beams as they turned onto an unpaved access road that wound through dense woods toward the lake. The SUV bounced and jostled over the uneven terrain, forcing Ethan to slow down as he navigated the rutted path. After several minutes, the trees parted to reveal the glittering surface of Miller's Lake, its dark waters reflecting the flashing lights of police vehicles parked along the shore. Ethan parked as close as he could to the scene, turning to his father. "Are you ready?" Dan nodded, his face set in grim determination. Mark and Leah helped him from the car into his wheelchair, while Ellie placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. As they opened the car doors, the smell hit them immediately. Stagnant water, mud, and something else, something unpleasant that spoke of things long submerged and recently disturbed. Aldi wrinkled his nose, hanging back slightly as his older siblings pushed their father's wheelchair toward the police perimeter. The damp earth made pushing the wheelchair difficult, and Mark and Leah had to work together to help Dan across the uneven ground, the wheels occasionally sinking into soft patches of mud. Ellie stayed close by her father's side, her arm linked with his as they approached the gathered law enforcement officers. Ethan walked ahead of his family, scanning the crowd of law enforcement personnel for a familiar face. He spotted Detective Vans standing near the edge of the water, deep in conversation with a uniformed officer. The detective was a stocky man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the perpetually tired expression of someone who had seen too much in his career. "Detective Vans?" Ethan called out, approaching with quick strides. The detective turned, recognition flashing across his weathered features. "Ethan, you made it." His eyes moved past Ethan to the rest of the family making their way across the muddy shoreline. "I see you brought everyone." "We needed to be here," Ethan replied simply. "What did you find?" Detective Vans gestured toward the lake where a tow truck was positioned, its powerful winch having already completed its work. Sitting on the shore, dripping with lake water and covered in silt and aquatic plants, was a car, or what remained of one. Despite the years underwater, there was no mistaking the faded blue sedan that had once belonged to Catherine Dawson. "We found it early this afternoon," Detective Vans explained as the rest of the family joined them. "We weren't looking for it, to be honest. We had a helicopter searching the area as part of an ongoing drug trafficking investigation. The pilot spotted something reflecting in the lake from above." Dan stared at the waterlogged vehicle, his face unreadable. Did you find... He couldn't finish the question. No bodies, Detective Vans answered, understanding the unasked question. That's what's strange. The car was empty when we pulled it up. Empty, Mark repeated, surprised. Are you sure? Completely empty, the detective confirmed, but we did find some interesting items inside. What kind of items? Ethan asked eagerly. Detective Vans reached into his pocket and produced a sealed evidence bag containing a water-damaged photograph. This was in the glove compartment, sealed in a plastic bag which preserved it somewhat. It's a photograph of your mother. Dan reached out with trembling hands to take the bag, staring at the faded image of Catherine, smiling, carefree, in a moment captured before her disappearance. There was something else, the detective continued, his voice taking on a more careful tone. We found items belonging to a man, a pair of men's sunglasses, a baseball cap, a receipt with a man's name on it. I knew it, Leah said suddenly, her voice bitter. She did run off with someone. That's not fair, Ethan protested immediately. We don't know that. What else could it be? Mark challenged. Mum's car at the bottom of a lake, men's belongings inside, no sign of Mum herself. It's pretty clear she staged her own disappearance. Our investigation suggests the car was deliberately sunk, Detective Vans added. There's no damage consistent with an accident. The windows were rolled down, allowing it to fill with water and sink. There's no evidence of violence or foul play. She knew what she was doing was illegal, Leah said, crossing her arms over her chest. Abandoning her minor children. She couldn't just walk away without consequences, so she made it look like something had happened to her. That's absurd, Ethan shot back. Mum would never abandon us. There has to be another explanation. Aldi, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Why would she leave us when Dad needed her the most, when we all needed her? Sometimes people break, Mark said quietly. The pressure gets to be too much. Dad's medical bills, 5 kids to raise, no help. She found a way out and she took it. Ethan turned desperately to Detective Vans. You don't really believe that, do you? After all these years, there must be more to the story. The detective sighed heavily. I've been doing this job for 27 years, Ethan. I've seen it before. People disappear because they want to, and they go to extraordinary lengths to cover their tracks. But why find the car now? Dan asked, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. After 14 years. Like I said, we weren't looking for it, Detective Vans explained. We were conducting aerial surveillance for a drug operation in this area. The helicopter spotted the car from above. You can sometimes see objects underwater from that angle, especially when the sun hits just right. Pure coincidence. He pulled out another evidence bag, containing a small water-damaged object. This is what identified the car as your mother's. Her driver's license was in the center console, along with this family photograph. Dan took the second evidence bag, staring at the water-damaged but still recognizable family portrait. Himself, Catherine, and all 5 children, taken just months before her disappearance and his accident. So what happens now? Mark asked, his practical nature asserting itself. Detective Vans rubbed the back of his neck. We'll process the car fully, see if we can find any other evidence, but I have to be honest with you, this is a 14-year-old case. We don't have the resources to mount a full-scale investigation unless we find something that clearly indicates foul play. So that's it, Ethan demanded. You're just going to assume she ran off and forget about it. I didn't say that, the detective replied patiently, but the evidence is pointing in a particular direction. No signs of struggle, no body, deliberate sinking of the vehicle, men's items in the car. It supports the theory that she left voluntarily. I can provide you with copies of all the evidence we've collected if you'd like, he added, looking around at the family. Photos, inventory lists, our preliminary findings. What's the point? Leah said, her voice hollow. It won't change anything. Dan, who had been mostly silent, suddenly spoke up. Ellie, I'd like to go home now. I'm tired. Of course, Dad, Ellie said softly, moving behind his wheelchair. Do whatever you need to do with the car, Dan told Detective Vans. We've lived with this mystery for 14 years. I'm not sure finding the truth now will bring us any peace." The family began to turn away, but Ethan remained rooted to the spot. "I'd like those copies," he said firmly. Detective Vans nodded, reaching into his vehicle to retrieve a manila envelope. "I had them prepared, just in case. There's also a separate envelope containing copies of some items we found in the glove compartment. My team photographed everything when we first pulled the car out." He handed the envelope to Ethan, then placed a sympathetic hand on his shoulder. "I've worked dozens of missing persons cases over the years. It's often the firstborn who has the hardest time letting go. I hope these help you find some closure, son." Ethan stared at the envelope in his hands. "Thank you." As he walked back to where his family waited by their car, he could feel the weight of the evidence, physical and emotional, pressing down on him. Despite what everyone seemed to believe, Ethan couldn't accept that his mother had simply abandoned them. There had to be more to the story, and perhaps the answers lay within the envelope he now clutched to his chest. The family piled back into the SUV, their earlier anticipation now deflated into a heavy silence. Mark slid into the driver's seat this time, taking the keys from Ethan without a word. "I'll drive," he said simply, starting the engine while the others settled in. Ethan climbed into the back row, claiming the space for himself so he could examine the contents of the envelope. As the car pulled away from Miller's Lake, he turned on his phone's flashlight and began sifting through the papers. The first pages were standard police reports, descriptions of the recovery operation, inventory lists of items found in the car, photographs of the vehicle from various angles, showing its deteriorated condition after 14 years underwater. Ethan studied each page carefully, looking for anything that might contradict the abandonment narrative, but finding little to support his belief in his mother's devotion. Mark drove more aggressively than Ethan had on the way to the lake, taking turns sharply and accelerating hard-on straightaways. The jostling made it difficult for Ethan to focus on the documents. "Could you slow down a bit?" he called to the front, but Mark either didn't hear or chose to ignore him. After a few more minutes of trying to read through the bouncing and swaying, Ethan reluctantly returned the papers to the envelope, deciding to wait until they returned home. Or better yet, until he was alone in his own apartment where he could study everything properly without judgmental glances from his siblings. The drive back to their father's house passed in uncomfortable silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from Dan in the passenger seat. When they finally pulled into the driveway, the porch light still glowing welcomingly, Aldi was the first to break the tension. "Are we still watching a movie?" he asked cautiously, glancing around at his family members. "We don't have to end the night like this, do we?" The question hung in the air for a moment, before Leah nodded slowly. "I think that would be good. We still have dessert waiting, and it would be a shame to waste the evening." "Dad?" Ellie looked to her father for confirmation. Dan managed a small smile. "Yes, I think we could all use the distraction." They helped Dan back into his wheelchair and made their way inside. Mark and Leah headed straight for the living room, turning on the TV and scrolling through options, while Ellie went to the kitchen to retrieve the apple pie she'd baked earlier. Aldi hovered uncertainly between groups before joining his older siblings at the TV. Ethan remained by the door, the envelope still clutched in his hands. "I'm not staying," he announced. The others turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Dan asked. "I'm going home," Ethan replied. "I want to go through these files properly. There might be something important." "Ethan," Mark interrupted, his voice tinged with exasperation. "Let it go. We've finally got some answers after 14 years. It's not what we wanted to hear, but at least now we know." "We don't know anything," Ethan insisted. "All we have is a car in a lake and a bunch of assumptions." "Please stay," Ellie said quietly. "Just for the movie. We can talk about all of this tomorrow when everyone's had time to process." Ethan looked at his youngest sister, her face open and pleading, then at his father, slumped slightly in his wheelchair, looking older and more tired than he had just hours ago. For a moment he considered relenting, sitting through a movie he wouldn't watch, pretending everything was fine while his mind raced with questions. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I need to do this." Without waiting for further objections, he stepped back through the door and walked to his car. Through the front window, he could see his family gathering around the TV, settling into their usual spots. Dan in his wheelchair positioned at the end of the couch, Ellie perched on the armrest beside him, the others spreading out across the remaining furniture. Ethan sat in his car for a moment, keys in the ignition but engine not yet started. "Where are you, Mom?" he whispered into the empty vehicle. "What happened to you? Did you really leave us?" He wiped at his eyes, angry at the tears that threatened to fall. "I was the oldest," he muttered. "After Dad's accident, I was the one who had to step up. I got a job instead of going to college right away. I helped with the kids. I did everything I could to hold us together. And now they all hate me because I won't accept that you abandoned us." Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Ethan turned on the engine and switched on the interior light. He opened the envelope again, spreading the documents across the passenger seat. This time he noticed a smaller envelope within, labeled simply miscellaneous. Curious, he opened it to find photocopies of personal items and documents that had been recovered from the car. Among them was some kind of lease agreement, though it wasn't clear due to the water damage but still partially legible. Ethan stared at it in confusion. It was dated approximately 3 months after his mother's disappearance, but the name on the lease wasn't Catherine Dawson. Instead, it bore an unfamiliar name, Elizabeth Carter. What caught Ethan's attention, however, was the signature at the bottom of the page. Though faded and blurry in the photocopy, he recognized his mother's distinctive handwriting immediately. The same looping C she used to sign his school permission slips, the same swooping E that appeared in all her shopping lists. "Elizabeth Carter," he whispered, staring at the signature. "Mum used a fake name." His heart racing, Ethan studied the document more carefully. There was an address listed on the lease. Pulling out his phone, Ethan quickly typed the address into a mapping application. The satellite view showed a property located in what appeared to be an industrial zone on the outskirts of the city, miles from their home and far from any residential area. It wasn't a house or apartment building, but what appeared to be a warehouse or storage facility in an area dominated by similar industrial buildings. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. "Why would Mom rent a warehouse under a false name?" Then he noticed something else on the lease, the name Raymond Doss. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but Ethan couldn't immediately place it. He typed it into a search engine, and the results made his blood run cold. Multiple news articles appeared, dating back years. Local businessman Raymond Doss questioned in money laundering investigation. Doss cleared of fraud charges due to lack of evidence. Raymond Doss properties linked to illegal loan operations. Ethan read through several of the articles, piecing together a picture of a man who operated on the fringes of legality. Someone involved in predatory lending practices and other questionable business dealings that law enforcement had never quite been able to prove. He looked back at the house, where through the window he could see his family watching the movie together. For a moment, he considered going back inside, showing them what he'd found, but he knew they wouldn't listen. They'd made up their minds about what happened to their mother, and no lease agreement or suspicious landlord would change that. "I'll do this myself," Ethan decided, putting the car in reverse and backing out of the driveway. Rather than heading toward his own apartment, he pointed the car in the direction of the address on the lease agreement, determined to find out what connection his mother had to Raymond Doss and why she would rent a warehouse under a false name. The GPS guided Ethan through streets that gradually gave way to less maintained roads as he approached the industrial district. Streetlights became scarcer and the buildings more dilapidated, abandoned factories with broken windows, storage facilities surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire, and the occasional all-night truck stop casting pools of harsh fluorescent light onto empty parking lots. After 20 minutes of driving, the GPS announced that he had reached his destination. Ethan slowed the car, peering through the windshield at a weathered single-story building set back from the road. A faded sign hung askew above the entrance, "Quality Furniture Refurbishing." Ethan pulled into the gravel lot, parking a short distance from the building. The place appeared to be operational, but barely. A dim light glowed from within, and an old pickup truck was parked by a side entrance. As his headlights illuminated the facade, he could see that the windows were covered from the inside, preventing any view of the interior. He cut the engine but remained in the car, considering his next move. He hadn't planned this far ahead, hadn't thought about what he would do when he actually found the place. It was nearly 10 p.m. now, and he doubted anyone would be working this late, yet there was clearly someone inside. As he debated whether to approach the building or return in the daylight, a figure emerged from a side door. An older man carrying a steaming cup in a plastic container. The man noticed Ethan's car immediately and began walking toward it with a measured, deliberate pace. Ethan's instinct was to drive away, but something told him this might be his only chance to learn something about this place and its connection to his mother. He rolled down his window as the man approached. The security guard, for that seemed to be his role, was older than Ethan had initially thought, perhaps in his early 60s, but moved with the confidence and strength of someone much younger. Despite the late hour and cool temperature, he wore only a light jacket over a uniform shirt with no company logo. His face was weathered but alert, eyes sharp as they assessed Ethan. "Evening," the man said, his voice surprisingly genial. "You lost? Not many folks find themselves out here this time of night unless they took a wrong turn." Ethan hesitated, rapidly calculating his approach. The truth seemed too risky. He couldn't just announce he was investigating his long-missing mother's connection to this place. Instead, he opted for a plausible lie. "I think you were right, I might have missed a turn," Ethan replied with forced casualness. "But as I was driving by, I noticed this place. You see, I run a small business and I've been looking for warehouse space in the area. I know it's late, but I saw the light on and thought I'd check it out." The guard took a sip of his coffee, studying Ethan over the rim of the cup. "This ain't for sale, if that's what you're wondering." "Who owns it?" Ethan asked, trying to sound merely curious. "Harvey Doss," the guard replied. Ethan's heart skipped a beat at the familiar surname. "Harvey Doss? I don't think I've heard of him." The guard raised an eyebrow. "Son of Raymond Doss, you never heard of Raymond Doss?" Ethan shook his head, feigning ignorance. "Should I have?" "Raymond owned half the industrial property in this area," the guard explained. "Passed away a few years back. His son Harvey took over the business." "I see," Ethan said, mind racing. "Is there any way to get in touch with Harvey? If not to buy the place, maybe to discuss renting part of it?" The guard chuckled. "Harvey's a private man. Doesn't deal directly with folks, especially not those who show up unannounced after hours." "Is there someone else I could talk to then? A manager or representative, perhaps tomorrow?" The guard seemed to consider this for a moment. "Tell you what, come back tomorrow during business hours. Ask for Ronald. He handles Harvey's affairs here." "Ronald," Ethan repeated, committing the name to memory. "He'll definitely be here tomorrow. I reports to him and I got his number. I can let him know tonight that someone's interested." "That would be great," Ethan said, deliberately not offering his own number. "I'll just stop by tomorrow." The guard nodded, taking another sip of his coffee. "Ronald likes to conduct business face-to-face. Just so you know, he doesn't appreciate folks bringing outsiders or partners to these initial meetings. Likes to size people up one-on-one first." "I understand," Ethan replied. "I'll come alone." He was about to roll his window back up when a thought struck him. If he left now, he'd have learned nothing concrete, just confirmed that the Doss family still owned the property. Taking a calculated risk, he called out to the guard who had already begun walking away. "One more thing," he said. "I don't suppose you've ever heard of a woman named Elizabeth Carter around this area?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. The guard's entire demeanor changed, his shoulders stiffening and face hardening into an expressionless mask. The affable security man vanished, replaced by someone much more dangerous. "You need to leave," he said flatly, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Now." Ethan, realizing he'd overplayed his hand but unwilling to retreat entirely, pressed further. "I just need to know if—" The guard moved with surprising speed, closing the distance to the car in 2 long strides. He placed his weathered hands on the edge of Ethan's partially open window and leaned in, his face inches from Ethan's. "You want ghosts?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. You're in the right place. She didn't want to be found. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. What do you mean? He asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Who didn't want to be found? The guard straightened up, rapping his knuckles against the doorframe. If you want to talk about that too, come see Ronald tomorrow, but I'd advise against it. He knocked on the car frame once more. You'd better go now. Ethan hesitated only briefly before putting the car in reverse. He backed away slowly, watching as the guard remained standing in the same spot, tracking him with cold eyes, until Ethan turned the car around and drove away. His mind was racing as he navigated back toward the town. The guard had clearly recognized Elizabeth Carter, his mother's fake name, and his reaction confirmed that Elizabeth, or Catherine, had some connection to this place. But what did he mean about ghosts? And why would he say she didn't want to be found, if not to confirm that his mother had disappeared voluntarily? None of it made sense, yet for the first time in 14 years, Ethan felt he was finally on the trail of something real, something that might explain what had happened to his mother. The dashboard clock read 11:35 p.m. as Ethan drove back toward the town, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of questions and theories. The implications seemed to support what his siblings believed, that their mother had chosen to disappear. But something about the guard's reaction, the sudden shift from friendly to threatening, suggested there was more to the story than a woman simply walking away from her life. Ethan knew he should share what he'd discovered with his family, but after their reaction at dinner and the lake, he doubted they would listen. They had made peace, in their own ways, with their mother's abandonment. Mark had become the practical, responsible one. Leah had hardened herself against further disappointment. Ellie had channeled her energy into caring for their father. And Aldi, who had been barely a year old when Catherine disappeared, had never really known her at all. None of them wanted to reopen old wounds except Ethan, who had never accepted the abandonment narrative in the first place. There was, however, someone else who might be interested in what he'd found. Ethan pulled over to the side of the road and found Detective Vance's card in his wallet. He hesitated before dialing, aware of how the detective might react to learning Ethan had gone to investigate on his own, but ultimately decided the information was too important to keep to himself. The detective answered on the fourth ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Vance here." "Detective, it's Ethan Dawson. I'm sorry to call so late." There was a rustling sound as if the detective was sitting up in bed. "Ethan, is everything all right?" "I found something in the evidence copies you gave me," Ethan said, deciding to ease into the full truth. There was some kind of contract or lease agreement in the miscellaneous envelope. The address there pointed to a warehouse rented under the name Elizabeth Carter. But the signature, it's my mother's handwriting. "I saw that," Detective Vance confirmed, sounding more awake now. "It caught my attention too." "Why didn't you mention it earlier?" Ethan asked, unable to keep the accusation from his voice. "Because it fits with what we already suspected," the detective replied patiently. "People who disappear voluntarily often establish new identities. They rent places under fake names, set up new lives." "But it's not a house or an apartment," Ethan pressed. "It's a warehouse in an industrial zone, and the landlord is Raymond Doss. Did you look him up?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes, I did." Raymond Doss was a well-known figure in certain circles. His businesses operated in grey areas of the law, predatory loans, debt collection practices that skirted legal boundaries. He was investigated several times but never successfully prosecuted. "So why would my mother rent a property from someone like that?" "That's where I think this all connects," Detective Vance said. "Based on the evidence we've gathered, I believe your mother needed to disappear quickly and completely. Raymond Doss's operations included helping people do exactly that, for a price. That warehouse was likely a transition point, a place where people went to get new identities before moving on." "You think she went there to change her identity?" Ethan asked incredulously. "To start a new life?" "It makes sense with the timing," the detective replied. "The lease is dated 3 months after her disappearance. That would give her time to make arrangements, possibly with a new partner." "What new partner?" Ethan demanded. "There's no evidence she was seeing anyone." "The sunglasses we found in the car," Detective Vans reminded him. Men's sunglasses with the name Ronald carved into one of the arms. Ethan nearly dropped the phone. Ronald? He repeated, his pulse quickening. You're sure the name was Ronald? Positive, the detective confirmed. Why? Does that name mean something to you? Ethan's mind was racing. The guard at the warehouse had mentioned Ronald, said he handled Harvey Doss's affairs, that Ethan should come back tomorrow to meet with him. Was it possible this was the same Ronald whose sunglasses were found in Catherine's car? Ethan? Detective Vans prompted. Are you still there? I'm here, he finally replied. I did something I probably shouldn't have. After I found the lease agreement, I drove to the address on it. You did what? The detective's voice rose sharply. Ethan, that was incredibly reckless. If there is any connection between your mother's disappearance and Raymond Doss's operations... I know, Ethan cut in, but I did learn something. There was a security guard there, and when I mentioned my mother's name, he reacted. He knew who she was, detective. And he mentioned someone named Ronald who works there, possibly the same Ronald whose sunglasses were in Mom's car. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Detective Vans spoke again, his voice was measured, controlled. Ethan, I need you to listen very carefully. These people are dangerous. If they're involved in your mother's disappearance, they won't hesitate to protect themselves. I don't want you going anywhere near that warehouse again, understood? But... No buts, the detective interrupted firmly. This is now an active police investigation. We'll handle it properly with warrants and backup. Your involvement could jeopardize everything, not to mention put you in serious danger. Ethan gripped the phone tighter. So what am I supposed to do? Just sit and wait? That's exactly what you're supposed to do, Detective Vans confirmed. I appreciate you sharing this information, but now I need you to step back and let us do our job. The guard told me to come back tomorrow to meet with Ronald, Ethan said. This could be our only chance to find out what happened to my mother. Absolutely not, the detective said firmly. Under no circumstances are you to go back there. We'll send in an undercover officer, set up surveillance. There are proper procedures for this kind of situation. Ethan knew the detective was right, but the thought of waiting, of possibly missing their one lead after 14 years of nothing, was unbearable. Still, he recognized the danger, both to himself and to any potential investigation. Fine, he conceded. I won't go back there. Thank you, Detective Vans said, relief evident in his voice. I'm going to make some calls now, get things in motion. We'll keep you updated on any developments, I promise. One more thing, Ethan said before the detective could hang up. You should know that my father and siblings are at risk too. If these people realize we're investigating, I'll arrange for patrol cars to make regular passes by both your place and your father's house, Detective Vans assured him. Get some rest, Ethan, and stay away from that warehouse. After ending the call, Ethan sat in his parked car for several minutes, weighing his options. The detective's warnings were logical, and the danger was real. But 14 years of questions, of wondering what had happened to his mother, of being the only one who believed she hadn't abandoned them willingly, it all pushed against the rational part of his brain, urging caution. In the end, he pulled his car into his apartment parking lot, knowing that sleep would be impossible, but recognizing that he needed to think carefully about his next move. Whatever he decided, one thing was certain. He was closer to the truth about his mother's disappearance than he had ever been before. Morning arrived with a clarity that had eluded Ethan throughout his restless night. After tossing and turning for hours, he had finally fallen into a fitful sleep around 4 a.m., only to be awakened by his phone ringing at 7:30. The caller ID displayed Detective Vans's number. I'm on my way to pick you up, the detective said without preamble when Ethan answered. We're going to that warehouse, but we're doing it my way. Be ready in 15 minutes. True to his word, Detective Vans pulled up outside Ethan's apartment building exactly 15 minutes later. He was driving an unmarked police car, dressed in plain clothes rather than his usual suit, jeans, a faded button-down shirt, and a worn leather jacket that made him look more like a construction worker than a detective. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, noticing immediately that the detective wasn't alone. In the back seat sat another man, also in plain clothes, who Vans introduced simply as Officer Miller, Tactical Support. "I've been up all night coordinating this," Detective Vans explained as he pulled away from the curb. "Based on what you told me about Raymond Doss and his son Harvey, we're treating this as a potentially dangerous situation. I've got plainclothes officers stationed at strategic locations around the warehouse and a tactical team on standby a few blocks away." "Shouldn't we take my car?" Ethan suggested. "The guard saw it last night. It might seem less suspicious." Detective Vans considered this for a moment before nodding. "You're right, we'll switch vehicles at the next parking lot." 10 minutes later, they had transferred to Ethan's car, with Ethan behind the wheel and Detective Vans in the passenger seat. Officer Miller remained in the unmarked police car, which would now serve as part of the surveillance perimeter. "Remember, you're not to get out of the car unless I explicitly tell you to," Detective Vans instructed as they approached the industrial zone where the warehouse was located. "I'm only allowing you to come along because you've already made contact and your presence will seem less suspicious. But this is a police operation, not a family investigation." Ethan nodded, his mouth dry with anticipation and nervousness. As they turned onto the street leading to the warehouse, he could see the same pickup truck parked outside that had been there the night before. But something felt different. The place seemed quieter, more still. "Something's not right," Detective Vans muttered, his experienced eyes scanning the property. "No movement, no vehicles except that truck." Ethan pulled into the gravel lot and parked in approximately the same spot as the previous night. They sat for a moment, observing the warehouse. The windows remained covered, but unlike the night before, no lights were visible inside. "Wait here," Detective Vans said, his hand moving to the concealed weapon beneath his jacket. "I'm going to take a quick look. If I signal you to leave, drive away immediately and meet Officer Miller at the rendezvous point." Ethan watched as the detective approached the building cautiously, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to assess dangerous situations. Vans first checked the pickup truck, peering through the windows before moving toward the side entrance, where Ethan had seen the guard emerge the night before. After trying the door and finding it unlocked, Detective Vans disappeared inside the building. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Ethan's anxiety grew with each passing moment, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. Finally, Detective Vans reappeared at the entrance, gesturing for Ethan to join him. Against his better judgment, but driven by the need to know, Ethan exited the car and hurried across the gravel lot. "It's empty," Detective Vans said as Ethan approached. "Completely cleared out. They must have left in a hurry after your visit last night." Ethan followed the detective into the warehouse, the smell of dust and abandonment filling his nostrils. The interior was cavernous and mostly empty, with clear indications that equipment and furniture had been recently removed, rectangular clean spots on the dusty floor, empty brackets on the walls where shelving had been attached, severed cables hanging from the ceiling. "They were definitely operating something here," Detective Vans observed, pointing to a section of the warehouse where partitions had created separate rooms. "Look at these. Makeshift living quarters, workstations. This was more than just storage." Ethan moved slowly through the space, trying to imagine his mother here, trying to understand what connection she might have had to this place. Had she been held against her will? Had she come here voluntarily seeking help to disappear? Or was there some other explanation entirely? "Over here," Detective Vans called from across the room. He was crouching beside an overturned desk, examining something on the floor. Ethan joined him to find the detective holding a photograph that had apparently slipped beneath the desk during the hasty evacuation. It showed a cargo ship docked at what appeared to be an industrial port, its name Eastern Horizon clearly visible on the hull. "Turn it over," Detective Vans said, handing the photograph to Ethan. On the back was handwritten information, the ship's name, a departure schedule dated for the following week, and a partial list of names that included Elizabeth C. and Ronald M. "They're planning to transport people on this ship," Detective Vans said, pulling out his phone. "And based on this list, Your mother might be one of them. He immediately radioed his team, requesting a search operation at the harbor and providing the name of the cargo ship. This is now highest priority, he instructed. We need to locate the eastern horizon and prevent its departure. Alert Harbor Patrol and Coast Guard. Turning to Ethan, he added, we need to get moving. If Ronald and his people left here last night, they might have accelerated their timetable. The ship could be preparing to leave sooner than scheduled. As they hurried back to the car, Detective Vans made another call, this time requesting officers to check on Dan and the rest of the family. After your visit last night, these people know someone's asking questions. We need to make sure your family is safe. Ethan felt a surge of fear for his siblings and father. I didn't think about that, he admitted. I was so focused on finding Mom. Call them, Detective Vans instructed as they got back into Ethan's car. Call each one individually and tell them what's happening. Tell them to stay where they are and that officers will be coming to secure their locations. As they drove toward the harbor, Ethan did as instructed, calling his father first. Then he called each of his siblings in turn, repeating the warning and instructions. Dan was shocked and furious. Mark and Leah were skeptical, Aldi confused, but all agreed to follow the detective's advice. They're all warned, Ethan reported to Detective Vans as they neared the harbor, but I'm not sure they really believe there's any danger. Better safe than sorry, the detective replied grimly. If Ronald and the DOS operation are as dangerous as I suspect, they won't hesitate to use your family as leverage if they feel cornered. The harbor came into view, a sprawling industrial port with numerous piers extending into the grey waters of the bay. Cargo ships of various sizes were docked along the wharves, loading or unloading their shipments, while smaller vessels navigated the channels between them. As they approached the main security gate, Detective Vans flashed his badge to the guard, explaining they were part of an ongoing police operation. The guard waved them through, directing them toward the harbour master's office. Inside, they found a flurry of activity. Several officers were already present, coordinating with harbour officials to locate the eastern horizon. "What's the status?" Detective Vans asked, approaching a uniformed officer who appeared to be leading the operation. "The eastern horizon left port last night," the officer reported, his expression grim. "Nearly 12 hours ahead of its filed departure time. Port Authority granted the early departure request due to cited weather concerns, though meteorological reports show no significant weather systems in the area." "They knew," Ethan said, the realization hitting him with crushing force. "They knew we were onto them as soon as I asked about my mother last night." Detective Vans placed a steadying hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We're not giving up. Harbour patrol boats are already in pursuit and we've alerted the Coast Guard. That ship can't have gone far in 12 hours. "What about here?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the docks. "Couldn't some of Ronald's people still be around?" "We're one step ahead of you," the officer replied. "We've detained several dock workers who were involved in the Eastern Horizon's accelerated departure. They're being questioned now." Detective Vans nodded in approval. "Good work. Let's head to the station. I want to sit in on those interrogations." The drive to the police station was tense, with Detective Vans constantly on his phone coordinating the expanding investigation. Every few minutes, he received updates about the search for the Eastern Horizon or reports about the security measures being put in place to protect the Dawson family. "They've got eyes on the ship," he reported after one such call. "Coast Guard aircraft spotted it about 100 miles offshore heading south. They're dispatching vessels to intercept." Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his mind racing with possibilities. Could his mother really be on that ship? After 14 years, was he finally close to finding her? When they arrived at the station, they found it buzzing with activity. Officers moved purposefully between departments, phones rang constantly, and an atmosphere of urgency permeated the building. To Ethan's surprise, his entire family was there, seated in a waiting area, Dan in his wheelchair looking bewildered and tired, Ellie standing protectively behind him, Mark and Leah seated side by side, their expressions a mixture of concern and skepticism, and Aldi fidgeting nervously in his chair. "What are you all doing here?" Ethan asked as he approached them. "I thought you were staying at home." "The police brought us in as a precaution," Mark explained, standing to face his brother. "They said it would be easier to protect us all in one location." "Protect us from what exactly?" Leah demanded, her arms crossed defensively. "Ethan, what have you done?" Before Ethan could respond, Detective Vans stepped forward. "Your brother may have uncovered the truth about your mother's disappearance," he said, his tone professional but kind. "And that truth could be dangerous for all of you." He quickly briefed the family on what they had discovered: the warehouse, the photograph of the cargo ship, the names on the list, and the possibility that Catherine had been forced to work for Ronald and the DOS operation. "So you're saying Mum didn't leave us voluntarily?" Ellie asked, her voice small and hopeful. "That she was taken?" "Based on the evidence we've gathered, it appears your mother may have become involved with a criminal organization run by Raymond Doss and his son Harvey," Detective Vans explained. "We believe she was forced to work for them, possibly because of a debt or other form of coercion." "That doesn't make any sense," Mark objected. "Mom didn't have any debts. Dad handled all the finances back then." Dan, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "That's not entirely true," he said quietly. All eyes turned to him in surprise. "After my accident, the medical bills were overwhelming," Dan continued, his voice strained with the effort of confession. "Our insurance didn't cover everything. Catherine was desperate. She tried to get bank loans, but we'd already maxed out our credit. I was in the hospital, then rehab. I didn't know what exactly she was doing to keep us afloat." "Dad," Ethan said, kneeling beside his father's wheelchair, "are you saying Mom might have borrowed money from someone like Raymond Doss?" Dan nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "She mentioned once, just once, that she'd found a way to handle the bills. She said not to worry, that she'd taken care of it. I was so focused on my recovery, on the pain, that I didn't ask questions. I should have asked questions." Detective Vans pulled up a chair and sat across from Dan. "Mr. Dawson, this is very important. Did your wife ever mention names? Raymond Doss, Ronald? Anyone connected to the loans?" Dan shook his head. "No specific names, but she did say something odd, about a week before she disappeared. She said everything she did for us. I thought she was just stressed, saying dramatic things because of the pressure we were under. I never imagined—" His voice broke, and Ellie placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The men we arrested at the harbor are being questioned now," Detective Vans said, addressing the entire family. "We're hoping they can provide more information about the Eastern Horizon and whether your mother might be on board." "I want to talk to them," Ethan said firmly. Detective Vans hesitated. "That's not standard procedure, Ethan." "Please," Ethan insisted. "I'm the one who spoke to the guard at the warehouse. I might recognize someone, or they might recognize me." After a moment's consideration, Detective Vans nodded. "All right, but just as an observer. I do the talking." He led Ethan down a corridor to a room where they could watch the interrogations through a one-way mirror. Inside the adjacent room, a middle-aged man in dock worker's clothing sat handcuffed to a table, being questioned by two officers. "That's not the guard I met," Ethan said, studying the man. They observed for several minutes as the dock worker stubbornly refused to provide any information beyond his name and employment at the harbor. Detective Vans made notes on a pad, occasionally murmuring observations about the man's body language or responses. "Let's try the next one," he suggested, after it became clear they would get nothing useful from this suspect. In the second interrogation room, they found an older man being questioned, and Ethan immediately tensed. "That's him," he said urgently. "That's the guard from the warehouse." Detective Vans studied the man through the glass. "You're sure?" "Positive," Ethan confirmed. "He's the one who told me about Ronald." The detective nodded thoughtfully. "Let's listen in." Unlike the dock worker, the guard seemed almost relaxed despite his circumstances, answering questions with a detached calm that bordered on amusement. When asked about his employment, he freely admitted to working security for Harvey Doss. When questioned about the Eastern Horizon, he claimed no knowledge of its cargo or destination. He's lying, Ethan muttered. He knew about my mother. He all but admitted she was there. Detective Vans watched the interrogation for a few more minutes before making a decision. I'm going in. Stay here and watch. Ethan observed as Detective Vans entered the interrogation room, introduced himself to the other officers, and took a seat across from the guard. The detective's approach was different, less confrontational, more conversational. You know, we've been watching that warehouse for a while, Vans said casually, though Ethan knew this to be a bluff. We've identified most of the people who were held there, including Catherine Dawson. The guard's expression didn't change, but a subtle tension appeared in his shoulders. We know she was forced to work for Doss, probably because of a loan she couldn't repay, Detective Vans continued. What we don't know is whether she's still alive and whether she's on that ship. I don't know what you're talking about, the guard replied evenly. That's interesting, Detective Vans said, leaning forward slightly, because you seem to know exactly who she was when her son mentioned her name last night. A flicker of recognition crossed the guard's face, quickly suppressed. Her son is here, by the way, the detective added. He identified you immediately, and let me tell you, he's pretty determined to find his mother after 14 years of believing she abandoned him and his family. The guard remained silent, but his eyes darted briefly toward the mirror. Here's the thing, Detective Vans continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. We're going to catch up with that ship. The Coast Guard is already in pursuit, and when we do, everyone on board is going to start talking to save themselves. Ronald, Harvey Doss, they'll throw you under the bus in a heartbeat to reduce their own sentences. The guard's composure finally showed cracks. He shifted in his seat, gaze dropping to the table. You're looking at serious time, Detective Vans pressed. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, probably human trafficking. But if you help us now, if you tell us where that ship is headed and whether Catherine Dawson is on board, I can put in a good word with the prosecutor. For a long moment the guard said nothing. Then he sighed heavily, the sound of a man making a difficult calculation. I'm old, he said finally. I'm sick. Prison's just another place to die. Then why not do one good thing before you go? Detective Vans suggested. Help a family find their mother. The guard considered this, then leaned forward, speaking quietly. I can't tell you where the ship is going. I genuinely don't know. That information is compartmentalized, but I can give you access to something that might help. What's that? There's an app, a secure messaging system we use. My login might still work. It has a GPS tracker for the ship, security camera feeds from on board. It's how Ronald keeps tabs on everything. Detective Vans perked up visibly. And you're willing to provide this access? The guard nodded slowly. Like I said, I'm dying anyway. Might as well do something decent for once. Detective Vans slid a notepad across the table. Write down the login information, everything we need to access it. As the guard began writing, Ethan felt a surge of hope unlike anything he'd experienced in 14 years. For the first time, he had concrete evidence that his mother hadn't abandoned them and might still be alive. Detective Vans emerged from the interrogation room with a grim satisfaction. The guard's login information clutched in his hand. Let's get this to the tech team immediately, he said to Ethan as they hurried down the corridor. If this app works like he says, we might be able to locate the ship and even get visual confirmation of who's on board. They headed to a room where several officers sat at computer terminals, working with focused intensity. Detective Vans handed the login information to a tech specialist, explaining its significance. We need to access this app without alerting anyone monitoring the system, he instructed. Can you do that? The specialist studied the information, then nodded confidently. I should be able to create a mirrored session that won't trigger any security alerts. Give me a few minutes. Ethan and Detective Vans returned to the waiting area, where the rest of the Dawson family remained. As they approached, Ethan could see the strain on each face, the hope warring with disbelief, the fear of disappointment after so many years of resignation. Did you learn anything? Mark asked, standing as they entered. Potentially, Detective Vans replied cautiously. The guard provided access to an app that might help us locate the ship and confirm who's on board. Our tech team is working on it now. And you really think Mom might be alive? Aldi asked, his young face a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. That she didn't leave us on purpose? It's looking that way, Ethan said gently. Dad just told us about the medical bills, how Mom was trying to find money to pay them. It makes sense now. She might have borrowed from DOS, couldn't repay, and they forced her to work for them. But for 14 years? Leah objected, though her usual skepticism was weakened by uncertainty. Without any contact at all. These organizations operate by isolating people, Detective Vans explained. They separate families, use threats and coercion to maintain control. If Catherine believed contacting you would put you in danger, she might have stayed away to protect you. Dan reached out to grasp Ethan's hand, his eyes filled with tears. I should have known, he whispered. All these years I thought she'd abandoned us because I was broken, because I couldn't take care of our family anymore. None of us knew, Dad, Ethan reassured him, squeezing his father's hand. But we're going to find her now. We're going to bring her home. Detective Vans's phone rang, interrupting the emotional moment. He answered it quickly, listening intently before saying, "We'll be right there." Turning to the family, he announced, "The tech team has accessed the app. They want us all in the computer lab immediately." They moved as a group down the corridor, Dan's wheelchair pushed by Mark while Ellie and Leah walked on either side of their father, protective and supportive. Aldi stayed close to Ethan, occasionally glancing up at his oldest brother with newfound respect. The computer lab was a large room filled with monitors, servers, and technical equipment. The specialist who had been working on the app beckoned them over to a central workstation where a large screen displayed what appeared to be a map with a blinking dot moving slowly across an expanse of blue. "That's the eastern horizon," the specialist explained, pointing to the dot. "According to the GPS tracker, it's approximately 120 miles offshore and heading south-southeast. We've already relayed these coordinates to the Coast Guard." "Can you access the security cameras?" Detective Vans asked. The specialist nodded, typing rapidly. "The app has limited access to certain security feeds, primarily in work areas rather than private quarters. I'm cycling through them now." The large screen split into multiple smaller screens, each showing a different area of the ship. Most displayed cargo holds, corridors, or mechanical spaces, but a few showed what appeared to be makeshift workrooms, where people, mostly women, sat at tables or computer terminals. "Stop," Ethan said suddenly, pointing to one of the feeds. "Can you enlarge that one?" The specialist expanded the indicated feed to fill the screen. It showed a room with several women seated at computers, their faces half turned away from the camera as they worked. "Can you zoom in on that woman in the back?" Ethan requested, his heart racing. As the image zoomed and enhanced, a collective gasp arose from the Dawson family. Though 14 years older, her hair now streaked with grey and her face thinner than they remembered, there was no mistaking the woman working at the computer. "Mom," Ellie whispered, tears streaming down her face. Dan reached out a trembling hand toward the screen, as if trying to touch his wife across the miles that separated them. "Catherine," he murmured brokenly. Detective Vans immediately got on his phone, relaying the confirmation to the Coast Guard teams pursuing the ship. "We have visual confirmation of at least one kidnapping victim on board. Repeat, visual confirmation of Catherine Dawson, missing person for 14 years. Proceed with all caution. There are multiple potential victims on board." Turning to the Dawson family, he explained, "The Coast Guard should intercept the ship. They'll secure the vessel and safely remove everyone on board. We'll need to maintain radio silence about this to avoid alerting anyone on the ship who might be monitoring communications." "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his earlier skepticism completely dissolved in the face of irrefutable evidence that their mother was alive. "We wait," Detective Vans replied simply, "and we prepare for your mother's return." Dan sat silently in his wheelchair, tears occasionally sliding down his cheeks as he stared at the image of his wife. Ellie and Leah huddled together, sometimes whispering, sometimes simply holding hands in silent support. Mark paced the room, his practical nature seeking outlet in movement. Aldi alternated between sitting beside his father and joining Ethan, who stood resolutely by the main monitor, refusing to look away for more than a few seconds at a time. "I knew it," Ethan said quietly to Detective Vans during a moment when they stood slightly apart from the others. "All these years I knew she would never have left us willingly." "You never gave up on her," the detective observed. "That kind of faith is rare." "She was the one who never gave up on us," Ethan corrected him. "Whatever happened, whatever they did to her, she survived. For 14 years she survived." In the quiet of that moment, surrounded by the evidence of their mother's continued existence, Ethan understood something profound about the nature of family bonds. Faith wasn't simply believing without proof, it was holding on to truth when everything around him suggested otherwise. For 14 years his family had fractured under the weight of abandonment, each member crafting their own armor against the pain. Yet beneath that armor, the connection remained, waiting to be reforged. As they stood on the precipice of reunion, Ethan realized that courage wasn't about facing external dangers, but about confronting the fear of hope itself, the terrifying vulnerability of believing that broken things could be made whole again. Their mother had endured captivity to protect them. Now they would brave the unknown to bring her home. Whatever challenges awaited them on that cargo ship, they would face them together, no longer as fragments of a shattered family, but as what they had always been beneath the scars and silence, a constellation of lives bound by an unbreakable thread of love that neither time nor distance could sever. After 14 years of believing their mother had coldly abandoned them, the Dawson family finally uncovered the horrifying truth. Catherine had been held captive by a ruthless criminal organization, forced to work off an impossible debt while her family fractured in her absence. Now, as they closed in on rescuing her, they believed nothing could stand in the way of their reunion. But they were about to discover that finding their mother would expose just how deeply entangled she had become in this criminal world, and the true nightmare she had been living. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Ethan and his family were still in the computer lab with Detective Vans and the tech specialist. The atmosphere was tense as they all crowded around the monitor, watching the hourly updated security camera feed. The tech specialist had identified through the GPS tracker that the ship was approximately 120 miles offshore, heading south-southeast. "We've got a visual on the vessel," the tech specialist said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Based on their current speed and trajectory, they're moving away from US waters quickly." Detective Vans immediately sprung into action, phone pressed to his ear. "This is Detective Vans. I need immediate contact with the Port of Oakland Coast Guard and FBI. We have confirmed location of a suspected human trafficking vessel approximately 120 miles offshore, heading south-southeast." The Dawson family huddled closer together, watching as Vans coordinated the response. Dan reached for Ethan's hand, squeezing it tightly. "They're sending multiple vessels," Vans informed them after ending the call. "The Coast Guard is dispatching their fastest cutters, and they're coordinating with Navy aircraft for aerial surveillance. We're going to intercept them." "Will they make it in time?" Leah asked, her earlier skepticism replaced with urgent concern. "They have to," Ethan replied, eyes fixed on the blinking dot representing the ship and their mother. Minutes stretched into hours as they remained in the computer lab. The GPS tracker showed the Coast Guard vessels converging on the eastern horizon. Ethan paced the room while his siblings took turns getting coffee and snacks from the vending machines. Dan remained stoically in his wheelchair, refusing to leave even when Ellie suggested he should rest. "I'm not going anywhere until we know," he insisted. Suddenly, the security feed from the ship went dark. The screens displaying the workrooms and corridors where they had seen their mother went black. "What happened?" Mark demanded, rushing to the tech specialist's side. "I don't know," the specialist replied, typing frantically. "The feeds just cut out." "Is it a technical problem?" Detective Vans asked, leaning over the specialist's shoulder. "Possibly, but unlikely. This could be deliberate. They might have cut the cameras. The Coast Guard must have reached the ship, Ethan said hopefully. They probably cut those lines as a safety measure to prevent anyone on board from being alerted to the raid. They waited in tense silence for updates. After what seemed like an eternity, Detective Vance's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened to the caller. "What do you mean?" he asked sharply. "That's not possible." When he ended the call, the look on his face sent a chill through Ethan's body. "What is it?" he asked, dreading the answer. Vance sighed heavily. "The Coast Guard vessels have reached the coordinates, but there's no cargo ship. All they found was an abandoned boat tied or anchored in the ocean with the GPS tracker aboard. A man was found in the vessel, unconscious, believed to be the one who navigated it there." "What?" Dan's voice cracked with disbelief. "How is that possible?" "We saw the ship. We saw Catherine." Vance shook his head grimly. "They must have planned for this. These people are smart and work-organized. They knew someone was asking about Elizabeth Carter, and they left immediately. They covered their tracks using the boat as a distraction, planting the GPS there but still updating the hourly security cam in the system. They don't even trust their own security guard," Vance continued. "Remember that the app system is compartmentalized. Not all information is available to everyone, even within their organization. The guard's access was limited." Ethan ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "So where's the cargo ship?" "Where's my mother?" "With how long it had left port, it couldn't have gotten very far," Vance replied. "I'm updating the Coast Guard and FBI about the security cam turning off, and the system logging out or blocking access from the guard's account." As Vance stepped away to make more calls, the Dawson family huddled closer together, waiting for news. Leah put her arm around Ellie, who was fighting back tears. Mark stood protectively near his father, while Aldi paced nervously, mimicking Ethan's earlier movements. When Vance returned, his expression was grave but determined. "FBI said they need to regroup and discuss strategy. These people are smart and careful. They won't let themselves be found easily." He looked at each member of the Dawson family in turn. "I can't let you go home now. It's too dangerous. We don't know if they would send someone after you. You should live in a temporary protection shelter until we resolve this situation." "What?" Dan's head snapped up. "No, that's impossible. You can't take all 6 of us and put us in a shelter. We each have our own lives. Aldi has school, Mark has his job, Ellie has college classes." "This is only temporary," Vance insisted. "A week or 2 at most. Your safety has to be the priority." The siblings began protesting all at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of objections. "We can't just disappear from our lives. What about Dad's medical appointments? I have exams coming up." "Listen to Detective Vance," Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. "Please, we need to do this." Mark turned on his brother, anger flashing in his eyes. "This is your fault. Things got worse because you handled things on your own and made a mess. If you had just left it alone—" "Left it alone?" Ethan stepped toward Mark, fists clenched. "Left Mom alone for another 14 years, is that what you wanted?" Officers quickly moved between the brothers as Ellie cried out, "Stop it! We can't fight each other now. The most important thing is to get proper rest somewhere safe until there's another update." The tension in the room was palpable as the brothers glared at each other. Finally, Vance handed them off to another officer, who was tasked with finding a temporary residence for them. "Make sure they're comfortable," Vance instructed. "They've been through enough." Just then, the station door opened and several people in suits entered, FBI agents. Vance greeted them, and they went straight into the conference hall. "We'll update you with a new search strategy as soon as we have one," an FBI agent assured the family. Another officer approached them. "Please come with me. I'll drive you to your temporary shelter." Through the windows, Ethan could see it was getting dark outside. 2 patrol cars and a police van waited for them in the parking lot. The family gathered their few belongings and followed the officer, leaving the station with heavy hearts but a renewed determination to find Catherine Dawson. The police van pulled up to a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The officer explained that it was a safe house kept by the department for situations exactly like theirs. It was located in a gated community with regular police patrols and security cameras at all entrances. As they entered, Ethan was surprised to find it wasn't the sparse institutional setting he had imagined. Instead, it was a comfortable family home with enough bedrooms to accommodate all of them, an open kitchen with a fully stocked pantry, and basic necessities. "It's not too bad," Leah admitted as she inspected the living room. The furniture was slightly dated but clean and comfortable. The officer handed Dan a folder containing information about the property. "This area is well protected, so you may leave for groceries or a short walk if needed. However, we strongly advise that you don't go too far out of the area. Remember, this is temporary and for your safety." "How long do we need to stay here?" Mark asked, still visibly unhappy with the situation. "Detective Vans suggested a week or two at most. We'll update you daily on the investigation," the officer replied. He handed them each a business card with his contact information. "Call this number if you need anything or notice anything suspicious." After the police left, the family began to settle in, each choosing a bedroom. The air was tense, filled with unspoken questions and simmering emotions. Leah and Aldi went to the kitchen to inventory the pantry. "If we're going to live here for a few weeks, we obviously need more than what's been prepared," Leah noted, making a list. "We should get fresh fruits, vegetables, meat. And snacks," Aldi added. "This place only has healthy stuff." Ethan, overwhelmed by both his family and the thought of spending every minute with them, retreated to his chosen room. He closed the door and sat heavily on the bed, exhaustion washing over him. But rest wouldn't come. Instead, he pulled out a notebook from his backpack and began making a mind map, connecting all the information he had learned about his mother's disappearance. He wrote down names: Raymond Doss, Harvey Doss, Ronald, and circled them, drawing lines to other facts: the warehouse, the Eastern Horizon, the fake identity, Elizabeth Carter. There had to be a pattern, some clue they had missed. Ethan was determined to find it. Hours passed as he worked, adding details from memory of the documents Detective Vans had shown him. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear the knock at first. "Ethan?" Leah called through the door. "Dinner's ready." Hungry despite his preoccupation, Ethan joined his family at the dining table. The meal was simple: pasta with jarred sauce and frozen garlic bread that Leah and Aldi had found in the freezer. But it was the first real food they'd had all day. They had just begun eating when Ethan's phone rang. Seeing Detective Vans's number, he quickly put it on speaker so everyone could listen. "I wanted to update you all," the detective began without preamble. "We've put together a plan with FBI and Coast Guard. Based on our discussion, we believe the ship must have sailed to Ensenada, Baja California, Mexico." "Mexico?" Dan echoed. "That's quite a distance." "It's approximately 600 miles south by sea from Oakland," Vans confirmed. "There's a major port there that has been tied to smuggling operations in the past. It would be the perfect place for a freighter trying to vanish after leaving the port of Oakland, or to offload people before disappearing into international waters or inland networks." "Are there other places they could have sailed?" Ethan asked. "Theoretically, yes," Vans replied. "But from the port report we have, based on the direction the ship traveled, how many hours have passed, and what the cargo ship carried and their destination, it all points to Ensenada." "What's happening now?" Mark asked, his practical nature asserting itself. "We've already contacted Interpol and Mexican Federal Police to stand by at the port," Vans explained. "The ship should arrive in approximately 10 hours. We've also contacted and dispatched Navy vessels in that direction. They'll be surrounded from all sides." The family exchanged hopeful glances across the table. "Thank you for everything you're doing, Detective," Dan said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'll call again tomorrow with any updates," Vans promised before ending the call. The family finished their dinner in anxious but hopeful silence. For the first time since discovering his mother's car in the lake, Ethan felt they were making real progress. The pieces were finally coming together. As he helped clear the dishes, he realized something else. Despite the tension and disagreements, they were working together as a family again. Mark had stopped glaring at him. Leah had softened her usually defensive posture. Even Dan seemed more present. more engaged than he had been in years. "We should get some rest," Ellie suggested as they finished cleaning up. "Tomorrow might be a big day." Ethan nodded, returning to his room. But before trying to sleep, he added one more detail to his mind map. Ensenada, Mexico, with a question mark beside it. "Almost there, Mom," he whispered. "We're coming for you." Ever since that evening, the family had been living hope against hope. Hours passed, night turned to morning, and finally there was another update from Vans. Rather than calling, he visited them personally at the safe house so they wouldn't need to leave and go to the station. The detective's face as he entered didn't bring the news they had been hoping for. The Dawson family gathered in the living room, tension palpable as they waited for him to speak. "The cargo vessel docked in Ensenada early this morning," Vans began, his voice carefully measured. "Mexican authorities, with support from Interpol and U.S. agencies, conducted a raid and rescued several workers." "And our mother?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. Vans shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, they couldn't find Elizabeth Carter, Catherine Dawson, or Ronald or Harvey Doss. It appears they must have fled and taken her with them, possibly using a smaller speedboat before the main vessel docked." The family's collective hope deflated like a punctured balloon. Ellie began to cry softly, while Aldi kicked at the coffee table in frustration. "How is that possible?" Dan demanded, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. "You said they would be surrounded." "There seems to have been a time gap between when the vessel docked and when the police intercepted it," Vans explained. "That allowed them to escape. Someone must have helped them from the port side." "So they knew we were coming," Mark said bitterly. "Again." "The other workers were found, but not our mother," Leah observed, her analytical mind working through the implications. "This seems intentional now, personal. They're holding her to make us pay because Ethan was the one who caused this." "That's not fair," Ethan protested, though doubt crept into his voice. Had his actions made things worse for his mother? "We've begun questioning the victims we rescued," Vans continued. "Most of them are traumatized and need hospitalization. Many were exposed to drugs on the cargo ship to make them obedient and subdued." He paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. One of them, however, kept muttering a name, El Almacen. "We found an envelope in her pocket." Vans handed it to Dan, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph of Catherine, younger than she would be now, but unmistakably their wife and mother. On the back was written, El Almacen. "What does it mean?" Ellie asked, looking over her father's shoulder at the photograph. "El Almacen means the warehouse in Spanish," Vans explained, "and this letter can't be coincidental. They purposefully put it in the woman's pocket so we would find it." "They're taunting us," Mark realized. "It's bait," Vans agreed. "They want us to find this El Almacen, but it could be a trap. It could be any warehouse where Doss and his men have prepared for our arrival in Ensenada, if we jump to it. I suggested we hold off until the victims were sober, and we could get more information from them. Maybe they know something about it." After Vans left, promising to update them as soon as he had more information, the family sat in stunned silence. The photograph of Catherine passed from hand to hand, each family member studying it as if it might reveal some hidden clue. Finally, Ethan stood up, determination etched on his face. "I've had enough of this waiting. I'm going to search for Mom myself." "What?" Leah exclaimed. "Didn't you hear what Detective Vans said? It's a trap." "I don't care," Ethan replied. "Every minute we wait here is another minute Mom is with those people. I'm going to Ensenada to find this warehouse." "You can't just walk into a foreign country and start investigating on your own," Mark argued. "You don't speak Spanish, you don't know the area, and you have no authority there." "I'm going," Ethan insisted. "Is anyone coming with me?" "I'll go," Aldi volunteered immediately. "Absolutely not," Dan said firmly. "You're 15 years old. You're not going anywhere near Mexico or these dangerous people." "Someone needs to stay with Dad," Leah pointed out. "I'll stay and take care of him, Ellie and Aldi." All eyes turned to Mark, who looked torn between his sense of responsibility and his concern for his mother. "I'll go with Ethan," he finally said, surprising everyone. Ethan hesitated. Mark was the last person he expected to volunteer, especially after blaming him for their current situation. "If anyone can handle him, it's Mark," Dan said with a nod of approval. "You two watch each other's backs." The brothers began packing minimally, changes of clothes, toiletries, passports, and the photograph of their mother with El Almacen written on the back. Before leaving, Ethan addressed the family one last time. "If the police ask where we've gone, tell them we left in the middle of the night when you were sleeping," he instructed. "We don't want them stopping us before we even get started." Leah crossed her arms. "I still don't like this. It feels too rushed, and I don't want to lose another one or two of my family." Ellie hugged both brothers tightly. "Please, if you really must do this, be careful," she whispered, "and bring Mum home." Ethan and Mark traveled to San Diego first, crossing the border into Mexico and then heading to Ensenada. The drive took several hours, during which they strategized their approach and developed a cover story. "We should pose as journalists," Ethan suggested as they neared the coastal city. "Researching maritime trafficking would give us a reason to be asking questions without raising too much suspicion." Mark nodded in agreement. "That could work, but we need to be careful about showing Mum's photo. If these people are looking for us, they might recognize us as her sons." Ethan had already thought of this. "We'll be selective about who we show it to. The photo is our only real lead, but we can't risk tipping off the wrong people." They checked into a modest hotel near the port area, choosing a room with a view of the harbor so they could observe ship movements. Ethan had printed photographs of Harvey Doss, Ronald, based on a license photo Detective Vance had shared, and El Cerro, the security guard from the warehouse. "We should split up the port into sections," Mark suggested, spreading a map on the bed. "Cover more ground that way." Ethan shook his head. "No, we stay together. These people are dangerous and we don't know who's working for them. We can't risk getting separated." Mark looked like he wanted to argue but ultimately agreed. "Fine. Where do we start?" "The docks. We talk to workers, mention El Almacen, and see who reacts." The next morning they dressed in casual but professional attire, nothing too flashy that would draw attention, but neat enough to pass as journalists. They brought notepads, their phones for recording, and a small camera to complete the illusion. The port of Ensenada was busy with activity, cargo ships loading and unloading, fishing vessels bringing in the morning catch, tourists boarding cruise liners. Workers moved purposefully across the docks, forklifts transported pallets of goods, and seagulls circled overhead looking for scraps. Ethan and Mark approached several dock workers, introducing themselves as freelance journalists, researching maritime trafficking for an exposé. Most were reluctant to talk, giving brief answers before returning to their work. Others seemed genuinely unaware of any illegal activities. By midday they had made little progress and decided to stop for lunch at a small cantina near the port. "This isn't working," Mark said, picking at his food. "No one's talking." "We need to find someone who's not afraid," Ethan replied, scanning the cantina. His attention was caught by an older man sitting alone at the bar, watching the docks through the window. Something about his attentiveness, the way he observed rather than merely looked, struck Ethan as noteworthy. "Let's try him," Ethan suggested, nodding toward the man. They approached carefully, ordering drinks at the bar before striking up a conversation with the older man. He introduced himself simply as Javier and seemed amused by their journalist cover. "You boys aren't journalists," he said in accented English, sipping his beer, "but you're looking for something or someone." Ethan and Mark exchanged glances. "We're searching for information about maritime trafficking," Ethan maintained. Javier chuckled. "Many journalists come asking these questions. Few find what they seek." Taking a calculated risk, Ethan showed him the photos of Harvey Doss, Ronald, and El Cerro. "Have you seen any of these men around the port?" Javier studied the photos carefully before handing them back. "Perhaps. Why do you ask?" Mark leaned closer. "They're involved in something illegal. We're trying to expose their operation." "Dangerous men," Javier commented, finishing his beer, "especially for young journalists to pursue." Ethan decided to take an even bigger risk. He pulled out the photo of his mother with El Almacén written on the back. "We're looking for this woman too. She might be connected to a place called El Almacén." Javier's expression changed subtly. A flicker of recognition quickly masked. He stood, dropping money on the bar. "Traffickers often disappear inland after they reach here," he said quietly. "They won't linger around the port area. The cargo trucking route is often used to move people inland from the coast." He pointed toward the industrial section of the port. "If you want to know more, go to the warehouse where the containers are stored. Ask for Miguel. Tell him Javier sent you." With that, he left the cantina, disappearing into the crowd outside. Ethan and Mark followed his directions, making their way to the container storage area. The warehouse was massive, filled with shipping containers stacked 3 high in some places. Workers operated forklifts, moving containers onto trucks for distribution. As they approached the entrance, a man in a hard hat stopped them. "This is a restricted area," he said in Spanish, then switched to English when he saw their confused expressions. "No public access." "We're looking for Miguel," Ethan explained. "Javier sent us." The man's expression remained neutral. "What are you doing here?" "We're journalists," Mark replied, sticking to their cover story, "researching maritime trafficking." Ethan showed him the photograph of Catherine. "We're trying to find this missing woman. We heard about a place called El Almacén that might be connected to her disappearance." The man studied them for a moment before responding. "There are several warehouses known as El Almacén in this area. I could drive you with my truck to show you." As he turned to lead them toward his vehicle, Ethan felt a momentary sense of triumph. They were making progress at last. But that feeling vanished instantly as something hard struck the back of his head and darkness rushed in to claim him. The next moment Ethan opened his eyes, he was in a very dark room. So dark that opening his eyes wasn't any different than closing them. His head throbbed with pain, and his arms and legs felt strangely heavy. As consciousness fully returned, he realized he was tied to a chair, his wrists bound behind him and ankles secured to the chair legs. "Mark," he called out, his voice muffled by what he now realized was a gag in his mouth. There was no reply. Panic began to set in as Ethan struggled against his restraints, the chair scraping slightly against what felt like a metal floor. Suddenly, a blinding light switched on overhead. Ethan blinked painfully, trying to adjust to the sudden brightness. As his vision cleared, he found himself inside what appeared to be a shipping container. The walls were bare metal with no windows and only a single door at one end. That door now opened, and a man stepped inside. The same man who had greeted them at the warehouse, the one they had asked about El Almacén. "Hello, Mr. Dawson," the man said in perfect English, pulling up another chair to sit facing Ethan. "I hope you're comfortable." He reached forward and removed the gag from Ethan's mouth. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded immediately. "Where's my brother?" "You can call me Ronald," the man replied, watching Ethan's reaction carefully. "Yes, I know who you are, Ethan Dawson. And I know why you're here." Ethan's blood ran cold at the name. Ronald, the same name on the sunglasses found in his mother's car, the man Detective Vance had mentioned, the one who supposedly worked for Harvey Doss. "Are you one of Harvey Doss's men?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Where is my brother? Where is my mother?" Ronald smiled thinly. "People here don't know me under that name, but yes, I work closely with Harvey." He leaned forward, studying Ethan with cold, calculating eyes. "I've been waiting to meet you, wondering if and when you would show up after we gave you a bite of a clue. The photograph in the woman's jacket. And here you are, quicker than I estimated." "Where is my family?" Ethan repeated, anger overriding his fear. "Your brother is safe for now," Ronald replied dismissively. "As for your mother, well, she's been with us for 14 years. A few more hours won't make much difference, will it?" Ethan strained against his restraints, fury building within him. "Let us go. The police know we're here. Detective Vance and the FBI are—" Ronald laughed, cutting him off. "No one knows you're here, Ethan. You made sure of that when you told your family to lie about your departure. Your brother told us. Very thoughtful of you." He stood up, adjusting his jacket. "Harvey has been dying to meet you. He'll want to handle you personally." With that, Ronald stepped out of the container, returning moments later with 3 armed guards. They untied Ethan from the chair but kept his hands bound behind his back. 2 guards gripped his arms firmly as they led him out of the container. Outside, Ethan was astonished to find himself in what appeared to be a complex maze of shipping containers, stacked and arranged to form corridors and rooms. Some were connected with makeshift doorways cut into their sides, others stacked to create walls around open spaces. The entire structure resembled a bizarre industrial labyrinth. They marched him through this maze, taking so many turns that Ethan quickly lost his sense of direction. Finally, they stopped at another container, indistinguishable from the one he had been in except for a number painted on its side, 14. One of the guards opened the door and Ethan was shoved inside. This container was larger and better lit than his previous confinement. Inside he found Mark, similarly bound but seated on a bench rather than a chair. Beside him, also bound, was a woman Ethan recognized immediately, despite the 14 years that had passed. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. Catherine Dawson looked up at her son, her eyes widening in recognition. She appeared much older than her 51 years, her once vibrant brown hair now streaked with grey, her face lined with stress and hardship. But most disturbing was the flat, almost vacant expression in her eyes, as if she were looking at Ethan through a fog. Standing near them was another man, surrounded by more guards. He was in his early 40s, well dressed in contrast to the utilitarian clothing of his men, with sharp features and cold eyes that assessed Ethan with clinical interest. "Harvey Doss," Ethan said, recognizing him from the photographs they had found during their investigation. "Ethan Dawson," Harvey replied with a slight nod. "The persistent son who wouldn't let sleeping dogs lie. I've heard a lot about you." Ethan hardly registered Harvey's words, his attention fixed on his mother and brother. Mark appeared relatively unharmed but scared, with a bruise forming on his cheek. Their mother seemed physically uninjured, but her vacant stare suggested she might be under the influence of drugs. Perhaps the same ones Vance had mentioned were used to keep the workers subdued. "Let them go," Ethan demanded, trying to sound commanding despite his vulnerable position. "You have me now. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" Harvey chuckled. "You're a very predictable man, Ethan. I knew someone like you would bite at the first opportunity. People driven by emotion rather than logic are so easy to manipulate." He approached Ethan slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "But you're right about one thing. I did want to meet you. I wanted to see the man who's been causing me so much trouble these past few days." "I will cause you much more than trouble if you don't release my family," Ethan threatened, though he knew his position gave his words little weight. "I intend to negotiate," Harvey replied, surprisingly direct. "I'll release your mother, but in exchange I want Mark, and I want you to stop talking to the US police. We can stage something believable for them, how your mother finally returned to you after 14 years of captivity elsewhere." "What?" Ethan was stunned by the suggestion. "You want to keep my brother as a hostage? That's insane. The police will still look for him." "Not if you tell them he decided to stay in Mexico. Perhaps he fell in love or found a job opportunity. People disappear by choice all the time, as your family once believed your mother did." Ethan shook his head vehemently. "I refuse. I won't trade one family member for another." "Then perhaps I keep both," Harvey said with a shrug. "Or all 3 of you. I'm being generous, Ethan. Don't mistake this for weakness." "The police will find us," Ethan insisted. "Interpol and Mexican authorities rescued the workers from your ship. They'll find this place too." Harvey laughed, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Do you think the local police would be on their feet without my support? I sacrificed those workers, handing them to the police to buy my men some time to get away. But those people, I doubt they could live in the free world after all this time here. They'll soon pile another debt, looking for another easy way out, and come back here on our lap." "You won't get away with this," Ethan said, the cliché sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Think about my offer," Harvey replied, unmoved by Ethan's defiance. "But do not hope for any rescue as long as you are here. After all, this is El Almacen, and I control everything within these walls." He nodded to his guards. "Take him back to his container. Let him consider his options." As Ethan was dragged away, he looked back at his mother, their eyes meeting briefly. Despite the drugged haze, he thought he saw a flicker of recognition. Of the mother he remembered. It gave him a small spark of hope that she was still there, beneath whatever they had done to suppress her will. "I'll get us out of here," he called to Mark and his mother, as the guards pulled him from the container. "I promise." Ethan was taken back to his room by the 3 guards led by Ronald. He looked into his mother's eyes the last time and saw the empty stare, a flat, cold expression, as if she was under influence. Once inside, Ronald chained him to the makeshift bed again, then stood watching him with clinical interest. "You should think carefully about Harvey's offer," Ronald advised, leaning against the container wall. "He might not have mentioned this, but he isn't a very patient man, not like his father." Ethan desperately searched for his personal belongings, his phone, wallet, passport, but they were nowhere in sight. They must have been confiscated while he was unconscious. "If I agreed, how would I know you'd let my mother go? Why would Harvey trust me not to go to the police as soon as we're free?" Ethan asked, trying to gather information. Ronald smiled thinly. Harvey was not like his father. His father feared the police, was calculating, and always thought of profit. But this one... He tapped his temple. "This one is a real sportsman. This is all a game to him." He moved closer to Ethan, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "And you wouldn't like to know what that man would do if he suspected you of cooperating with the police. We have eyes everywhere. Even now, we know where the police keep your family at that protection house." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Just how powerful are you people?" Ronald didn't answer directly, merely offering another cold smile before departing, the heavy metal door clanging shut behind him. Left alone, Ethan tried to make sense of his surroundings. The container was bare except for the cot he was chained to and a small bucket in the corner that he assumed served as a toilet. There was no window, no way to tell the time or even whether it was day or night. Time seemed to pass in a blur. Without his watch or phone, Ethan could only guess how long he had been captive. His mind wandered everywhere. Where could he be? What kind of structure would allow for this maze of containers? How was his family doing? They must be searching for him and Mark by now because neither of them could answer their calls. Would they tell Vans they were gone? Vans would realize something was wrong if he called and couldn't reach them, right? Ethan paced the small space as much as his chains would allow, trying to formulate an escape plan. The container was solid metal, the door secured from the outside. His restraints were tight, professional. These people clearly had experience in keeping prisoners. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of his mother's vacant stare and Harvey Doss's cold laughter. When he woke, Ronald was standing over him, ready to take him to see Harvey again. This time, however, he was alone, without the 3 guards from before. "Get up," Ronald ordered. "Harvey wants to see if you've reconsidered his offer." As Ronald leaned close to undo the chains connecting Ethan to the bed, Ethan caught sight of a phone on Ronald's belt. The screen was illuminated, showing what appeared to be a messaging application, perhaps the same secure system the guard had given them access to at the police station. A desperate plan formed in Ethan's mind. If he could somehow get hold of that phone, even for a moment, he might be able to send a message or his location to Detective Vans. After 14 years, he had memorized Vans's contact number personally, having called him countless times during the investigation into his mother's disappearance. Ethan feigned cooperation, allowing Ronald to help him up. As they stood close together, he deliberately stumbled, bumping against Ronald in an attempt to reach for the phone. But Ronald shifted position, moving the phone out of reach. "Careful there," Ronald said, steadying Ethan with a firm grip. "Don't try anything stupid." Ethan nodded, swallowing his disappointment. He would need another opportunity, a better moment when Ronald wasn't so alert. They walked down the corridor of containers again, taking the same route as before. Ethan tried to memorize every turn, building a mental map of the complex. The place didn't seem as big as he had initially thought. The containers were just connected to create an illusion of size and complexity, but who knows? When they entered the container where Harvey waited, Ethan was surprised to find that Mark wasn't present this time. Only his mother and Harvey remained. Catherine still appeared drowsy, her eyes unfocused, but she was conscious. "Ah, Ethan," Harvey greeted him with false warmth. "Have you had time to think about my generous offer?" "Where's my brother?" Ethan demanded immediately. "Considering other accommodations," Harvey replied vaguely. "Don't worry about him. Worry about your answer." Ethan stood his ground. "My answer is still no, I won't leave either of them behind." Harvey sighed theatrically. "Your mother wasn't always like this, you know. When she was sober, she worked very efficiently, doing registration and data entry for fake documents, arranging all the logistics to transport people who wanted to disappear. She helped many desperate people start new lives." "What did she do to end up here?" Ethan asked, his curiosity overwhelming his anger for a moment. "She owed me $30,000, Harvey replied casually, "to pay for your father's medical bills after his accident, but she couldn't pay it back. As per the agreement in our contract, she had to serve here until the debt was paid." "She's worked long enough," Ethan argued. 14 years. She must have paid that debt many times over." Harvey shrugged. "I did your mother a kindness by letting her keep working. We don't just dispose of people when they become inconvenient. There's no way out of here without my permission." He studied Ethan for a moment, head tilted slightly. "I'll give you 3 more days to think about my deal. If you say yes, we will let you and your mother go, give you a new place to live. But Mark stays here." With a malicious smile, he added, "You might be interested to know that Mark has considered leaving you here and going home with your mother. He told me he doesn't like you much." "You're just trying to provoke us," Ethan snapped, "playing mind games." "Perhaps," Harvey conceded, "but 3 days is all you get. After that, I might withdraw my offer entirely." He nodded to Ronald. "Return him to his room." On the way back to his container, Ronald was briefly distracted by a conversation with another worker about a shipment schedule. Ethan seized the chance, swiftly snatching the phone from Ronald's belt and tucking it behind his own at the front, despite the limited movement caused by the cuff. Heart pounding, he maintained a neutral expression as Ronald finished his conversation and continued escorting him down the corridor. When they reached his container, Ronald secured him to the bed again and left, apparently unaware of the theft. As soon as he was alone, Ethan pulled out the phone, fingers trembling with urgency. The battery was at 15%. He didn't have much time. Opening the messaging application, he quickly typed Detective Vance's number and sent a ping location with a rescue note that simply read, "Ethan and Mark, need immediate rescue. Container maze at port. Mother here too." Then, with practiced movements from his teenage shoplifting days, he deleted the message from the sent folder and cleared the recent contacts. If he was lucky, Ronald wouldn't notice the message had been sent before discovering his phone was missing. Ethan had just hidden the phone behind him when the door opened again. Ronald stormed in, face red with anger. "Where is it?" he demanded, searching the small space frantically. "Where's what?" Ethan replied, feigning innocence. "My phone. I had it when I brought you back." After a moment of aggressive searching, Ronald spotted the phone beneath Ethan, where he had laid on it. He grabbed it, checking it carefully for any signs of tampering. "What did you do to it?" he demanded, scrolling through the apps. "Nothing yet," Ethan replied, hoping Ronald wouldn't check the phone's battery usage or data transmission logs. Ronald examined the phone for several tense minutes before apparently satisfied that Ethan hadn't managed to use it. "I warned you. Do not try anything funny." With a final warning glare, he left the container, slamming the door behind him. Ethan exhaled slowly, allowing himself a small flicker of hope. The message had been sent. Now all he could do was wait and hope that Detective Vance would understand and act quickly. Ethan hadn't been alone for more than an hour when he heard commotion outside, shouting voices, the sound of running feet. Ronald burst into the container, accompanied by 2 armed men. "Move now!" Ronald ordered, his voice tight with urgency. The men roughly unchained Ethan from the bed and dragged him to his feet. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, though he suspected, hoped, he knew the answer. "Shut up and move," one of the men snapped, shoving him toward the door. They rushed him through the container maze, taking different turns than before, moving deeper into the complex. Eventually, they reached a container that appeared to be connected to a vehicle of some kind. Inside, Ethan found Mark already there, bound and gagged. "Ethan!" Mark managed to call through his gag when he saw his brother. The container door slammed shut behind them, and Ethan felt movement. The container was being loaded onto what he guessed was a truck, but he wasn't sure. The armed men remained inside with them, weapons trained on the brothers. "What did you do?" Mark asked when one of the men removed his gag. "They're in a panic out there." "I sent our location to Detective Vans," Ethan whispered back. "I stole Ronald's phone." Mark's eyes widened. "Is that what this is all about? They're moving us? Why did you keep doing those impulsive things? They could have killed us." "Quiet!" one of the guards barked, raising his weapon threateningly. The brothers fell silent as the container continued to move. Ethan noticed that Mark's restraints were looser than his own. Apparently, the men had moved so quickly they hadn't secured him properly. "Can you get free?" Ethan mouthed silently when the guards weren't looking directly at them. Mark gave an almost imperceptible nod, subtly working at his bindings. The container's movement continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Then came a different sensation, the rocking motion of water. They were on a ship. "Where are they taking us?" Ethan wondered aloud. "I said quiet," the guard repeated, striking Ethan across the face with the back of his hand. Suddenly, the container came to a stop. The guards tensed, listening to sounds outside. There was shouting, then what sounded unmistakably like gunshots. One guard moved to the container door, cracking it open slightly to look outside. A burst of gunfire sent him stumbling backward, blood blossoming on his chest. The second guard raised his weapon, but in that moment of distraction, Mark made his move. Having freed his hands, he lunged at the guard, grappling for the gun. They struggled briefly before Mark managed to knock the man unconscious with a powerful blow to the head. "Quick, untie me," Ethan urged. Mark worked on Ethan's restraints, his hands shaking with adrenaline. "They must have tracked the phone signal," he said as he freed his brother. "That was smart thinking." "We need to find Mom," Ethan said, retrieving the fallen guard's weapon. "She must be somewhere on this ship." Cautiously, they approached the container door and opened it slightly. What they saw took their breath away. They were indeed on a ship, a cargo vessel now surrounded by smaller Coast Guard boats. A helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight sweeping across the deck. Armed officers were boarding the ship from multiple points, engaging in firefights with Harvey's men. "We need to be careful," Mark warned. "They don't know we're friendlies." They slipped out of the container, staying low to avoid both the gunfire and detection. From their position, they could see Ronald crouched behind a stack of pallets, unaware of their escape. Ethan spotted a metal pole lying nearby and grabbed it. With Mark providing cover, he circled around and approached Ronald from behind, striking him hard enough to render him unconscious. As they moved across the deck, staying in the shadows, Ethan spotted Detective Vans among the boarding officers. He was advancing with his weapon drawn, leading a team toward what appeared to be the ship's command center. Suddenly, Harvey appeared from behind a container, gun in hand. He fired twice, catching Vans in the chest. The detective went down, but not before firing back, his bullet striking Harvey directly in the chest. "Detective!" Ethan shouted, starting forward. A Coast Guard officer spotted them. "Civilians, take cover!" he yelled, rushing to their position. "Identify yourselves." "I'm Ethan Dawson. This is my brother Mark," Ethan explained rapidly. "We were kidnapped. Detective Vans was coming to rescue us. Our mother is somewhere on this ship. Catherine Dawson." The officer spoke into his radio, confirming their identities. "The woman has been located and secured," he informed them. "She's being treated by medical personnel. You two need to come with me. The ship isn't fully secure yet." "What about Detective Vans?" Ethan asked, looking toward where the detective had fallen. Medics are with him now, the officer replied, but we need to get you to safety immediately. As they were escorted across the deck, they passed Harvey's body. The man responsible for their mother's 14-year disappearance lay still, eyes open but unseeing, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. Ethan felt no satisfaction at his death, only a hollow relief that his reign of terror was over. The officer led them to a Coast Guard vessel, where paramedics were treating several rescued individuals. Among them, on a stretcher being prepared for helicopter evacuation, was their mother. "Mom," they cried in unison, rushing to her side. Catherine was conscious but disoriented, her eyes struggling to focus on their faces. A paramedic explained she had been given tranquilizers and would need time to fully recover. "We're going to airlift her to the hospital immediately," the paramedic explained. "You can accompany her if you wish." As they prepared to board the medical helicopter, Ethan saw Ronald being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of hatred as he glared at the Dawson brothers. The paramedic helicopter soon arrived, and they watched as Vans was loaded aboard first, medical staff working frantically to stabilize him. Then Catherine was carefully transferred, with Ethan and Mark climbing in beside her. As the helicopter lifted off from the cargo ship, Ethan looked down at the scene below. Coast Guard vessels surrounding the ship, officers securing the remaining criminals, medical teams attending to other victims. After 14 years, the nightmare was finally ending. The hospital corridor buzzed with activity as medical staff rushed between rooms, attending to the multiple patients who had been brought in from the raid on the cargo ship. Ethan and Mark sat side by side in uncomfortable plastic chairs outside the emergency department, waiting for news. "Family of Detective Vans," a doctor called, approaching them with a clipboard. "We're not family, but we're with him," Ethan explained, standing quickly. "How is he?" "He survived the surgery," the doctor reported. "The bullet caused some internal bleeding, but we were able to control it. He'll need time to recover, but the prognosis is good." Relief washed over Ethan. "Can we see him?" "He's still unconscious from the anesthesia. It will be several hours before he wakes up. I suggest you get some rest yourselves." Ethan nodded gratefully. "And our mother, Catherine Dawson?" "She's stable," the doctor assured them. "The drugs in her system are being cleared gradually. We're monitoring her carefully, but physically, she appears to be in relatively good health considering the circumstances." Another doctor approached them. "Your mother has been moved to a private room. She's resting now, but you can see her if you'd like." Ethan and Mark followed the doctor down the corridor to a small but comfortable room. Catherine lay in the bed, an IV in her arm, and monitoring equipment beside her. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady, her face relaxed in sleep. She looked older than her years, the 14 years of captivity evident in the lines on her face and the grey streaking her once brown hair. "Mum," Ethan whispered, taking her hand gently. To his surprise, her fingers curled around his and her eyes fluttered open. "Ethan," she murmured, her voice raspy from disuse. "Mark? Is it really you?" "It's us, Mum," Mark confirmed, moving to her other side. "You're safe now. Harvey is dead. Ronald is in custody. It's over." "My boys," she said weakly, tears forming in her eyes. "You're all grown up." Before they could talk further, a nurse entered, explaining that Catherine needed rest and that they could speak more when she was stronger. Reluctantly, the brothers left her side, promising to return soon. In the waiting area, they found a police officer who informed them that their family had been notified and were on their way to the hospital. Within the hour, Dan, Leah, Ellie and Aldi arrived, escorted by another officer, the same one who had driven them to the shelter house. The reunion was emotional and chaotic, tears, hugs, exclamations of relief and disbelief. Dan was wheeled directly to Catherine's room, the others waiting outside to give them privacy for their first meeting in 14 years. "How did you find us?" Ethan asked the officer. "Detective Vans received your message and immediately mobilized every available resource," the officer explained. "The phone's location data led us right to the container complex. We arrived just as they were moving you to the ship." Hours passed as the family waited, taking turns visiting Catherine and checking on Detective Vans. Finally, in the early evening, A nurse informed them that Vans was awake and asking for Ethan. Ethan entered the detective's room quietly, mindful of his condition. Vans lay propped up slightly on pillows, his normally robust frame looking diminished in the hospital bed. An IV dripped steadily beside him, and monitors beeped softly. "Ethan," Vans said weakly, extending his hand. "You did it, son." Ethan took the detective's hand, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "We did it together. You saved us." "I just followed the breadcrumbs you left," Vans replied with a pained smile. "That was quick thinking with the phone." "I'm not too proud of it. It was from my shoplifting days when I was younger, but I guess the impulse is still there," Ethan said. "How badly are you hurt?" he asked, noticing the detective's pale complexion. "I've had worse," Vans lied unconvincingly. "They tell me I'll make a full recovery, just need some time off. Maybe I'll finally take that fishing trip I've been putting off for years." They talked briefly about the operation, how the Coast Guard had surrounded the ship, how Ronald and several other key members of Harvey's organization had been captured, how the investigation was expanding to identify all involved parties. "What's going to happen to Ronald?" Ethan asked. Vans's expression hardened slightly. "He's facing a laundry list of charges: kidnapping, human trafficking, forced labor, assault, drug trafficking, document fraud. The prosecutor is confident he'll be looking at 30 years to life, especially with the testimony from your mother and the other victims." Ethan nodded, satisfied. "There's something else you should know. When I was captive, Ronald told me they had eyes everywhere. He said they even knew where the police were keeping my family at the protection house." Vans's eyebrows shot up. "That suggests there might be a mole in the department or someone with access to our systems." "That's what I thought too," Ethan confirmed. "We'll take this very seriously," Vans assured him. "I'll have internal affairs conduct a thorough investigation. We'll find whoever leaked that information." He paused, studying Ethan carefully. "Thank you for telling me this. It could have compromised the entire operation if we'd missed it." After a moment of silence, Vans continued with a wry smile. "You know, this is exactly why we don't let civilians handle things by themselves. You could have gotten yourself and your brother killed." "I'm deeply sorry," Ethan said, realizing his impulsive decision had put Detective Vans in this position. "But if I hadn't," he began to protest. I know," Vans interrupted, his tone softening. "You found your mother when none of us could, but next time, and I sincerely hope there isn't a next time, maybe consider calling for backup before charging headfirst into danger." Ethan smiled sheepishly. "I'll try to remember that." "You either need to quit doing that impulsive thing where you take matters into your own hands," Vans said with a chuckle that turned into a pained wince, "or we're going to have to enroll you in the police academy. You've got good instincts, son." "Is that a job offer, Detective?" Ethan asked, surprised. "Let's call it a thought to consider," Vans replied. "The force could use someone with your determination. Think about it while I'm recovering." "Your mother and the other victims will need time," Vans cautioned as Ethan prepared to leave. "Long-term captivity and drugging. It leaves scars that aren't always visible." "We'll get her whatever help she needs," Ethan promised, "and the others too." Back in the waiting area, Ethan found his family huddled together, talking quietly. Dan had returned from Catherine's room, his eyes red from crying, but a peace on his face that Ethan hadn't seen in 14 years. "She asked for all of us," Dan told them. "She wants to see her children together." They entered Catherine's room as a group, Dan in his wheelchair beside the bed, the 5 siblings gathered around. Catherine was sitting up now, looking more alert though still frail. "My family," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I never thought I'd see you all together again." "We never stopped looking for you, Mom," Ethan told her, though in truth he had been the only one who never gave up the search. "I tried to escape many times in the beginning," Catherine explained, her voice breaking, "but they threatened to hurt you all if I didn't cooperate. They showed me photos of you, of Dan in his wheelchair, of the children at school. Said they had people watching you." "It's all over now," Dan assured her, taking her hand. "You're safe. We're together again." "Tell me about yourselves," Catherine requested. looking at her children with wonder. "Tell me everything I've missed." One by one, they shared highlights of their lives: Mark's accounting career, Leah's bookstore management, Ellie's college studies, Aldi's growth from infant to teenager. Ethan spoke last, describing his relentless search for her over the years, his refusal to believe she had abandoned them. "I knew you would be the one," Catherine said, squeezing Ethan's hand. "The stubborn one, the one who wouldn't let go." As they talked, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 14 years of pain, of broken trust and fractured relationships within the family. The way they had each coped with their mother's disappearance, Mark becoming practical and responsible, Leah hardening herself against disappointment, Ellie channeling her energy into caring for their father, Aldi growing up without memories of his mother, and Ethan himself clinging to his belief in his mother's love, refusing to accept what seemed obvious to everyone else. That faith had ultimately led them here, to this hospital room where a family torn apart by criminal greed was beginning to heal. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. Catherine would need intensive therapy to recover from her ordeal. The family would need to rebuild relationships strained by 14 years of absence and misunderstanding. The legal aftermath of dismantling Harvey Doss's operation would likely involve them all in investigations and testimonies. But looking around at his reunited family, his father's face alight with joy, his siblings gathered close, his mother alive and free, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. The search that had consumed half his life was over. The truth, painful though it was, had finally come to light. As the evening deepened into night, the family remained together, sharing stories, tears, and cautious laughter. Outside the hospital window, stars appeared in the clear sky, countless points of light emerging from darkness, guiding those below toward home.